Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to Cellar Door Skeptics Podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully the power will stay on as it is storming like crazy here. It's like almost a Stephen King novel. And it was weird today. I got out of work and my kids were off playing and my stepson's been working with me at my job. And we're on the way home and I called my wife and she's like, "Yeah, the kids are all out. We're not real hungry. We don't have any food in the house anyway because we were gone camping all weekend." So I was like, "All right, hey son, let's go grocery shopping." I didn't know there was going to be a storm. We go grocery shopping. We're getting on the way home. We start seeing lightning. So we're trying to hurry home. Literally, as we pull in the driveway, it's downpouring to the extent of like large drops. My shirt was soaked just from walking to the car with one armload of groceries back into the house. So, crazy weather we were having here tonight.
Same thing.
Yeah, they actually.
Same thing. What I do is whenever I hit the huff stuff, I just pull my shirt up over my ears, so everything else can get soaking wet. But I got to cover my hearing aids because that's $3,000 in my ears to get screwed up by water. So I literally look like cornholio every time I come in the house when it's raining.
Well, yeah, you don't want to ruin your headset. I mean that's not like you could just go out and buy one for $25 or $30 on Amazon.
Yeah, no, man, we're talking loan level if they get damaged enough. Because I mean, almost the end of the 3-year mark, and so like these giant storms that we got, yeah, I'm gonna keep my head out of the water.
Yeah, and so they're calling this storm this weekend. Or this week, I guess. They call it, I guess it's a new weather term. And I've never heard of this, but a friend of mine posted this tonight. They're calling it quasi-linear convective system. Have you ever heard of that?
No, our old friend, well, actually, I don't know if he was on this show or not. I had a friend of mine from college. He got a engineering degree with me, but he was a meteorologist ahead of that. And so whenever we hit something weird like this, where there's like 3, 4, 6, 7 syllables in a row of scientific meteorology, we always called him out. We're just like, dude, what is this? The heck does this mean? My assumption is that they're calling it quasi-linear because it's relatively straight. If you look at the map, that we got it in our link, so anyone can take a look at it because they had a nice big view. But it's just basically a red line that runs diagonal along the entirety of Lake Michigan, to the point where it looks like a straight line to the entire length, and obviously the jet stream moves west to east, and so we're looking at this thing just kind of gathering strength and steam over that warm Michigan lake water, and it's going to be bringing in just a huge storm because that big red line isn't going anywhere, and so like then they're saying it's between 8 and 11 o'clock tonight, which is the 28th. Of August, the day after my 34th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, man!
Dude with gray hair now.
Yeah.
And it was nice. And so I basically got yesterday. We had some storming and some wind, so I stuck a big stake in the ground and wrapped all my sunflowers around it. And I didn't unwrap them this morning because I knew that storm was coming through. So I think they all survived. I don't know because they're 10 feet tall, man. So like, we'll see if if they're all pieces or not, because that's tall and skinny flowers. Like on the big for like farmers who do this, like they have a field filled with them, so they all kind of lean on each other and they won't break. But when you have just 10 of these things just kind of standing up 10 feet high, like I lost 2 of them last weekend to a squirrel just climbing them, and they broke the thing right in half. So,
why would a squirrel even think to climb? How could it even get halfway up?
They eat the flowers off the head, and especially when the seeds start budding, they're soft. They just eat the whole head, and so they climbed up 3 of them, broke them in half, and ate all the soft nectar and seed and pod and flower and all that stuff. It sucked, but what are you gonna do?
That's crazy. I don't know. I guess that's crazy. So I Googled it. I don't this actually isn't like a new term, I don't think. It seems like there's articles dating back over 10 years ago for this. So I don't know what the heck they're talking about, that it's some new term, but that's what MLive was telling us.
I wasn't talking about none of that new stuff. It was new to you. It's like buying a new car. It's like, it's a new car. So it's a new quasi-linear convective system for Chris.
Sometimes. I don't know. It's kind of cool. So the dentist's not our science segment tonight.
If we disappear, but if we disappear, that's the reason. Because
yes,
it might break Comcast, because Comcast is pretty crappy as far as my internet connection is on a weekly basis.
Yeah. And you're right. And the other thing that could hinder it, if it's a storm, my dog flips out. So like, I have not slept at all last night. I think I got 2 hours, maybe 3 hours of like sleep. You know, I was in bed for like 8, but out of the sleeping time, I just couldn't sleep. You know, the dog would bark. I mean, my dog, we even have medicine for my dog. My dog just runs through the house, goes all crazy like, and barks. And it doesn't matter what we do, because she was traumatized for whatever reason. Somebody must have chained her up outside or something like that in storms.
You don't just turn your hearing aids off when you go to bed at night?
I wish.
I slept great.
Nope, neither my wife or I slept very well last night. But you know, I mean,
like
it is what it
tonight.
is.
I slept like a baby yesterday. I don't know. That's the only perk of being I think they say the perks of being a wallflower in the old book. That's the only perk of being a deaf person, is that you can sleep through any storm or any dog losing their mind. It gets a little freakier when you sleep through your kids shrieking their head off, and it gets even freakier when you sleep through a fire alarm. So there's levels to the benefits of this. So yeah.
Well, speaking of storms,
I call him Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Donald Trump is standing up for what's right. He wants to make America great again.
Donald Trump wants to make America great again. Yes, folks.
He'll fulfill all campaign promises.
There is a 80s themed song about Donald Trump's campaign that is the new intro music to our Donald Trump segment tonight. Because we've done Donald Trump, I swear, I don't know, almost every week now, it seems like. And I know that it's probably getting old and we're getting sick of talking about him, but he keeps violating all sorts of different things, and he keeps just pissing lots of people off. Like, I think it's just like his MO. He's like, all right, how can I out-Trump myself today?
No, it is. It is. I mean, he's coming from television background. That's the whole thing. It's like, what's crazier than what we did last week? How do we stay in the news? It really is. He is treating national news and international news like it's a polling game. It's like sweeps week every week. It's miserable.
So this week, President Trump warned evangelical leaders that Democrats will overturn everything that we've done, and they'll do it very quickly and very violently if Republicans lose control of Congress in the midterm elections. Speaking to the group in a state dining room of the White House, Trump painted a stark picture of what losing the majority would mean for the administration's conservative agenda, according to an audio tape of his remarks provided to the New York Times by somebody in attendance. So here, this is what he says, man. This is what he says. I won't torture you with the audio of it. Not this time, at least. He says this. He says they will
turn my hearing aids off, man.
They will end everything immediately. When you look at Antifa, and you look at these guys, these are violent people. That sentence doesn't even fit together, first off. But so he's essentially saying if the Democrats take over, it's going to be violent like Antifa. like yes, all the Democrats that'll be in office are going to be Antifa spokespeople. That's what's going to happen. They're all secretly Antifa military group. Come on, Trump, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm sorry, that's just insane to me.
That's pretty bad. I mean, I would like to think that the evangelicals aren't that paranoid or that susceptible to something that is just blatantly absurd. It really is. Like, first off, Trump's still going to be in office. So let's say there's a major majority switch in the House. So it flips. and the Senate, there's a couple seats that are switching here and there. When everything is settled, it'll probably still be very, very close to a 51-49, 52-48, with Mike Pence as the tiebreaker if necessary. So Trump's still in the White House, a flip for the Democrats in the House, and then a basically 50-50 Senate, maybe one way, maybe the other way. You can't overturn everything you want with those numbers. The only way you can do that is if you have what they have right now, which is a supermajority, and they haven't really done anything. He talks about all the things that they've done. They haven't done much. The only thing they got passed was this taxation bill, which essentially is a freebie for all the capitalists in this country. They didn't repeal Obamacare. They've deregulated the heck out of the EPA. I mean, what else have they really done? I mean, just deregulation across the board for taking away a bunch of rules about how Americans don't have cancer in the air. But other than that, they really haven't done anything besides the tax bill. So what are we going to turn around?
Exactly.
I think he's just playing on that slippery slope or like that cliff or whatever. But it's not real.
No, it's not. And that's the funny thing, you know. I mean, yeah, we're obviously not going to do this. You know, and it's him campaigning. I mean, what has he spent, 2 years doing? Campaigning, pretty much. I mean, he's done nothing but campaign. I don't think he's actually really done...
Campaign fear.
Yeah, anything else, positive for his, career other than campaign and keep the rhetoric going, And it must work because, people like him. He has diehard supporters, that I would heavily question. But he essentially, one of his big remarks was, that about getting rid of the Johnson Amendment, which was a 1954 provision of tax law that threatened religious organizations like churches with a loss of tax-exempt status if they endorse and oppose political candidates. And he goes, maybe it's why you're very plateaued. I hate to say it. If you were a stock, you'd be like, you're very plateaued. I really believe you're plateaued because you can't speak. They really have silenced you, but now you're not silenced anymore. This is what he just said to the religious leaders. Now, if you can speak Trumpese and decipher this, think about this. What does that mean to you? So the 54 Amendment, provision, tax law, essentially was saying, hey, it tied your hands. Well, don't we want that? Is the only reason he's endorsing this because when he runs, he wants all the support, but if somebody else is going to run, isn't he going to be the first person to yell and call, hey, we need to get this back in law. We don't want somebody, advocating for Obama, for his third term at the pulpit, Well,
what he needs to do is he's essentially trying to buckle down and lock down his base. He needs to absolutely, unquestionably control the evangelicals. And a lot of things that he's done throughout his campaign and throughout his presidency, I mean, paying off porn stars and Playboy Playmates isn't exactly something that Jerry Falwell would be proud of, although he might be. I'm not really sure. Those people have some weird lives behind the camera. But in the end, I mean, what we're talking about is what it is like a dyed in the wool Mike Pence evangelical supporting someone who has a history like Donald Trump is hypocritical when it comes to obeying God's law and the strictness of what they believe is supposed to be a moral character. And so he has to lock them down, essentially bribing them. He's giving them. He says the reason the evangelical and the Christian base in this country is getting smaller. We've seen that the growth of the nuns and the growth of the other has been shrinking the strength of the Christian base in this country. And a lot of those people believe that this is a Christian nation founded from the Puritans back in the day. So they're saying that that's the basis of this is a Christian nation. And they believe that that should be something that's allowed in politics. And so giving those people, so tossing them that olive branch, right, we'll give you politics and we'll remove the restrictions that allow you to start creating what you dream of, which is a theocratic state where people who believe things other than Christianity would have less power and less true rights than you. That's what they want, and they're willing to eat or at least lick the coal that he's offering in response for that. Because I mean, I've said this a bunch of times. Mike Pence, he would do whatever it takes with Trump to turn the United States into a Christian nation. He would slog through the depths of the sewer to sacrifice for his God to create the United States, the theocratic nation. I don't think that is even a question. So that's kind of what I think that he's doing, is he's begging, the Christian base to help him and the GOP in the midterm, and then hopefully hold on to him until 2020.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that he actually hasn't overturned the Johnson Amendment. He actually hasn't successfully done anything for that. He actually signed an executive order last year directing the IRS not to aggressively pursue cases in which the church endorses candidates. So he couldn't get rid of it, so he signed an executive order. But in the real world, the IRS doesn't actually take action against churches almost ever, unless they took out some big billboard or political campaign on national TV. Then maybe they would, but they haven't done it in years. I don't know. It just seems a little crazy to me.
Well, what Trump did, essentially telling the IRS not to prosecute the tax law, basically is exactly what Obama did with marijuana. He's like, listen, guys, Justice Department, just take it easy. We're not going to prosecute at the federal level marijuana offenses, especially small and petty ones. And the whole U.S. was like, okay. And Sessions went down and he went into his little Gollum hole and he got angry. But the same thing is going on with the Johnson amendments. Basically, Trump told the IRS, listen, guys, don't prosecute, don't go after any churches that are proselytizing from the pulpit or putting their money into politics. We're just going to kind of let that go, unless it's a really, really big, extravagant case. Then you guys obviously have the right to prosecute that. That's the same thing that's happening here, because Trump doesn't have the ability to repeal or revise an amendment to the tax code. Like, he can't do that on his own. That requires an act of Congress, and I believe he has to sign it. And so two of the three, so either the House and the Senate, and they can override a presidential veto. But the word amendment is in there, and it's an important word because this is something that doesn't just on a whim. An executive order can maybe, you guys won't pay attention to it, but you can't just flip this thing around anytime he wants. And so he's going to tout that he's overturned it. And that he had said this in the past, that he just basically told them not to enforce the Johnson Amendment. And that was like him overturning it, but it's not. But he'll take any kind of credit he can get for that, because it brings those people to the votes. Because they're like, okay, we can't stomach Trump. He's disgusting and horrible, and we don't like anything he has to do or anything associated with him. But if he can get us closer to Christian rule and Christian laws, and in God we trust over every single schoolhouse in this country, then we'll stomach it for 4 years or 8 years or whatever. Like that's what he's that's the deal. The art of the deal. That's the deal he's offering the Christian base, and he's hoping they'll take it so they can keep him in power.
Exactly. Now, if you thought that was bad, you got to listen to this.
It gets worse.
McCain,
It does.
Mr. President, why won't you call John McCain a hero, sir? Mr. President, any thoughts on John McCain? Mr. President, any thoughts on John McCain, sir?
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, do you have any thoughts on John McCain? Do you have any thoughts at all about John McCain? Do you believe John McCain was a hero, sir?
Thank you.
Nothing at all about John McCain. Mr. President, the American Legion's asked you to lower the flags to half staff. Any reaction to the American Legion? Any action to the American Legion asking you to put a proclamation about John McCain?
Going that way, John.
Why won't you say anything about John McCain?
So he literally doesn't know what to say about John McCain. And I think we could talk about Trump's blunders and all these other things, and I'm not going to even advocate that I am a fan of John McCain. I'm not even going to say that, because I don't feel that I actually enjoy John McCain or think he's really that great of a politician. I don't really feel very saddened by his death. I actually kind of think he's a really shitty human in some aspects in how he handled what he believed and voted for. And I get he's just a GOP politician, blah, 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 blah. But I feel like we're whitewashing history. He's a pretty horrible person. But if we could take that for a second and just move that aside, because I'm pretty sure that Hannah and I easily can agree, and there would be like a 5-minute segment about us bitching about John McCain and saying, yep, we don't care if he dies. But Donald Trump fought with him for so long, and it's almost the irony here, and I hate saying this, but McCain has been setting up his death since he's gotten cancer in a way to give Donald Trump the middle finger. So Hannah, do you know, obviously you watch the news, you know the history behind this?
I just know that the history that basically that Trump and McCain weren't getting along enough to the point where McCain basically said he's not welcome at any of my events afterwards, as best he could, because I like you I haven't posted anything on this. I haven't gotten into the conversations on this because McCain is one of those people that, like, it's love and hate. Like, he is responsible for the GOP not being able to repeal the Affordable Care Act in the most recent sessions that they had. So, like, there are some things about him that are really great, and there were some things about him that were really bad. And I've had this conversation with multiple people about essentially being able to love and hate, or like and hate someone simultaneously for their views, and that's fine. I don't have to put someone on a binary category, and that's kind of how he was with Nate. So, like, with this thing here, I just know that he was fighting enough with Trump to the point where Trump wasn't welcome at his afterlife services.
Yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is how long did it take him to actually say anything about John McCain, right? I mean, he fought with him on it, but how long did it take him?
Till Monday, wasn't it?
Yeah. And here, this is exactly what he said. This is literally the length of the statement that he said about John McCain.
We very much appreciate everything that Senator McCain has done for our country, so thank you very much.
Literally, that's it. I mean, we're talking not even, 10 seconds. But yeah, and I could play you a clip, and I probably shouldn't do this, but I could play you a clip from the campaign where he went on for like 10 minutes about how much he's not a war hero, how much he thinks, he shouldn't call his people dummies. And it's like, okay, well, he's not a war hero just because he called your constituents dummies, man. That's stupid. Like, why would you even think that?
Or when Trump said he likes his war heroes that weren't captured. I mean,
yeah,
it's offensive to, like, you and I have a major problem. Like, we are pacifists. We have a major problem with war. We have a major problem with the tendencies of nationalism to try to grow out and spread the word, to try to, through the sword, spread the word of democracy, as opposed to, going out there and just doing the right thing, blah, blah, blah. This is a long conversation, but people can look at our backlog and see these things. And McCain was the kind of guy who was he was a hawk. He was very willing to use military force because he was a military guy. Like, that was his world. But, like, on the other side of these things, like, you can't diss a guy who would not let the people who were in prison, prisoners of war before him, he wouldn't leave until they were gone, because he was given special status because his father and grandfather were, famous military men. And so when he was found out in Vietnam to have been captured, they moved him to the front of the list, trying to negotiate with him, and he refused to leave because those other guys had been there before him, and he couldn't, on moral character, leave before people who got there before him just because of his privilege where his father and any kind of special status that he had gotten from his father and grandfather. Like, there are things there that are they're respectable, even if you have a major problem with warfare and the military machine and all of the horrible stuff that comes with the United States spending $717 billion on a defense budget this year, you can still respect a guy who had enough moral character to do stuff like that. Like, those are things that you can do. You can give them at least a little bit. And Trump can't even do that. Like, Trump is the biggest narcissist I have ever seen, ever in the history of anything I've ever run into. It's unbelievable that anything about someone, even someone is, he has a historical impact as McCain. He can't make it not about him. Like, he can't do it. And it's just like, whatever, dude. Just screw you. I will not shed a tear. I will not any kind of sadness really from John McCain's passing. But also, I can respect what he did, and Trump can't even do that.
Exactly, and that's the funny thing who did he choose? To eulogize him. And I guess I didn't know this. I guess McCain's given many eulogies, but who did he choose? Barack Obama and George W. Bush. Those are the two people he wants to eulogize him. And, the George W. Bush one, I guess, seems a little silly to me, too. I guess I don't understand the connection there that well. But
they were close. They were pretty close. Even though McCain did go out and say that his support of the Iraq War was one of the bigger mistakes that he had made, aside from the huge snafu that he got into when he got into this savings and loan crisis, and back when he first started when he was first in the House, I believe it was, before he became a senator. He said that getting into the Iraq War was one of his biggest mistakes, and Bush is directly tied to that. So it's interesting he chose him.
Yeah, and I thought that was kind of weird too. I mean, it's a funeral for a politician that I don't care for, that I think created a lot of horrible policies. That, yes, he's a war hawk, and by all means, I absolutely cannot stand some of that stuff. But
yep.
I like the afterthought of the middle finger. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just, I'm sorry, but like, that just, for me, that's just even better. I don't know, and maybe that's wrong of me to think that. If you talk about like the guys in the Senate that were, I don't know, tough enough, like, bad enough, like they had enough spinal character to stand up to something like that. Like, McCain was one of the few that probably had that. Like, a lot of those guys, like, they're so afraid to lose their base. They're so afraid to not get elected. I think McCain was kind of a freewheeling dude on that one. I don't know. He was willing to just put his stuff down. If the shit hit the fan, so to speak, McCain was like, whatever, let it hit it. Let's do this, bro. Yeah, and that's true. I mean, I can't imagine Ted Cruz being able to do that. He'd be like, oh God, what's going on? I'm about to lose to a Democrat in Texas. This is like unprecedented. This is terrible. Like, that's what I imagine is going on in Ted Cruz's head right now. But McCain wouldn't have been like that. Like, he was just, McCain was probably the last of the traditional American conservatives. Like, they were kind of this moderate middle ground kind of conservative that did teeter-totter back and forth, kind of like Justice Kennedy on the Supreme Court. It bounced back and forth between having some liberal things and some conservative things, mostly conservatives because they were on the conservative side, but like, they bounced a little bit. Like, I don't think that really exists anymore, and I think McCain was probably like the last standard bearer for that. Yeah, I think you're right too. And the funny thing is that, here he is, here he is giving the middle finger to Trump. And then even on top of that, even in some of the further funeral plans, he's bringing on people that, just is kind of saying, hey, screw you. He's bringing on Russian descendant of Vladimir Kara-Murza, right? And that's who's going to carry his casket to the funeral, or to up to the memorial service. So I don't know. That's the only good thing I can say about McCain, I guess. One thing that I thought was really cool. This is a random story, but McCain met with a jailer in Vietnam who was like his jailer, and said he forgave him, that he wasn't angry with the guy, and the guy cried his eyeballs out and apologized. They interviewed him, I believe it was NPR who talked to him, and they asked him, they said, how do you feel that John McCain passed? And the guy was just like, it's a very sad day. He said he was in great inspiration. Like, it's just a really, like, it's one of those things you don't expect them to. It's like, oh, we're gonna go and interview the guy that kept John McCain in a cell. Like, there's a breadth and a story and a depth of history there. Like, I
John McCain is one of those weird side effects of not having term limits in the Senate that makes me a little bit uncomfortable that he was there for 30 plus years, but also like he had enough expertise to be, kind of a bipartisan deal maker, which is what he was used for essentially towards the end of his career with all the connections he had. I don't know. There's benefits and detriments to who, what, where, and how he was, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens to this to the U.S. government now that he's gone.
Well, with that being said, I feel it's time that we do some science. I don't know. You think it's science time, Hannah?
It's science time.
I think it's science time.
I don't know. Is there a song that you're playing right now?
There is.
Science time.
I hear it, so I don't know if you're making fun of me or not.
I'm making
One of the
fun
side
of you.
effects, everyone. We're doing this all from remote locations now. Last week we did it together with our friend Boyce, and at my shop we had a in person, and it's so much better. So Chris might be playing the Teletubby theme song. He may be playing some mumble rap from YouTube. I don't know what is happening, so I apologize in advance if it's bad, and I take credit if it's good.
There you go. Well, for the science segment tonight, I wanted to kind of bring back, again, a little bit more traditional. I wanted to talk through, different things that are happening in the science community. And this one's not so much about a new revelation or a new ingenious thing that's happening, right? This is about the HPV vaccination. And a lot of people thought that this was going to be a bigger risk for sexual behavior among high school students. So think about it this way, HPV, people were saying, hey, that's a great deterrent. Kids won't have sex because they don't want this, disease. And it's like, well, no, we don't want to do that. The health community is yelling and yelling and yelling, and they're like, no, I think that's a good thing that they should just get this.
So people were saying that potentiality for cervical cancer was a good way to keeping teenagers from having intercourse, because they'd be like, if I have sex, I could possibly get a sexually transmitted disease that would potentially give me cervical cancer.
So yes and no.
That was the whole thing?
Yes and no. They were not saying specifically, hey, kids should get cervical cancer if they have sex, but they're saying, hey, look, this is a deterrent. We take this away by vaccinating people. It's going to take away the deterrent. That's how they were saying it. I'm elaborating a little bit just to, make everybody feel a little bit better. But there's a new study that came out from Harvard School of Public Health, and it's a survey, but they actually estimated the impact of this vaccination on almost 900,000 high school students. So that's a lot. It's not just a small sample size. So they actually looked at...
Yeah, that's a solid sample.
Yeah. So what they did is they looked at, there's 23 states that have signed legislation designed to boost vaccination rates for the HPV education in school. That's pretty good. That's not, I don't know, that's almost like a split if you think about it between blue and red states, 23 states. Yeah, that's pretty close. But
that's getting there. That's good.
It is. It's getting there. And these Harvard researchers analyze data on sexual activity, which is like sexual activity, but with sax over your head. It's for the people like me who are like, nobody wants to look at me during sex, but the
oh my God.
it's basically, they're talking about youth risk behavior surveillance systems. And they actually looked at this for almost 15 years. And they studied it before and after the vaccination came out, and they had all these participants, and it's this huge amount of participants. And to me, that's the reason I chose this to have a conversation with you about it, is because A, I didn't know if you'd heard about this study, and B, I found it very interesting because they took such a large sample size, and they weren't saying, hey, we just took 1,000 students and surveyed them, right? We looked at sexual history of 1,000 students. They're spanning half of the nation. State-wise, and they're doing almost, 1 million participants. So that's pretty good. I think that's pretty good, at least.
Yeah, well, it definitely gives credence to the size and scope. So, like one of the first things that you look into in a scientific analysis is what's the sample size and how strong is it, and that basically gives it gives a little bit of depth of how well you can weigh their findings. Because if they have low sample size and it's relatively uncomplex and there's not a lot of diversity, then you can be like, well, this is a cool finding, but you need more science. This sounds like it's got enough diversity and enough. It's not just regional or semi-local. Like this is probably bouncing over most of the country, and I would say that a lot of the states that they're probably dealing with, we're probably gonna be liberal. So we're gonna be talking about metropolitan areas that are very diverse. There's a lot of cultural interconnectivity there. It's not gonna be homogenous at all. It's not gonna be like the Midwest with a lot of white people only. So this is probably a good sample of the diversity of the United States in general, maybe just a smaller section of it. And I mean, if you think about it, we have 375 million people in this country roughly, and we're looking at, almost a million of them. So we're closing in on, a pretty solid chunk. What is that? 0.33%, 0.25%. So that's a pretty good chunk of so that's a pretty good sized chunk of information that we can use to comfortably extrapolate that to the rest of the country.
Yeah. And essentially what they've seen is that there has not been an increase in sexual intercourse since the vaccination has come out. So it's not like, hey, people are getting this virus or getting this vaccination, therefore they're having more sex, because they're not actually seeing a trend in that. And I actually linked and you can actually read the publication. So it's not, you don't have to worry about me just telling you. But you can actually go read the publication, and you can see that there is not an increase. It is not something that all of a sudden people are like, yep, I'm going to go have more sex. It's just not happening in teens, at least.
Well, I was just looking. I was just looking it up because one of the things that I've seen, and I want to say, the CDC report shows decline in teen sexual activity and teen pregnancies. Still, in you know what I mean? Like this isn't like the vaccination happened. We saw an increase. Like we've seen a decrease on average of teen sexual activity and teen pregnancy been going down pretty consistently for a while now. And one of the things they're talking about is increased awareness, increased intelligence. You can't keep kids in this weird abstinence-only bubble where they don't understand how to prevent sexual transmitted diseases. They don't know anything about sex. They just have impulses and they just go fulfill them. Now they know what sex is. They talk with their parents. They talk with their school teachers. They talk with counselors. Like there's all this information that's out there. And as long as you don't keep kids in the closet, not in the homosexual sense, but just lock them in a small room in your basement. They're going to get out there and they're going to see what's going on in the world. And adding this vaccination, I don't think that has any major influence on whether or not teens are going to have sex or not have sex. Because, like I was saying earlier, I was incredulous that people were like, well, now that you can't catch HPV, that now you won't get cervical cancer. That's way too complex of a thought for a teenager who is maybe rounding second base, heading towards third, and looking at home. You know what I mean? Like there's a simplicity to the instinct and the simplicity to the drive, that sexual drive in a teenager. It's very impulse controlled, and so like the very few things, the few seeds of intelligence and education that make it through that are going to be very simple and very concise, and having a breadth of information that tells you how to not have kids, how to stay safe during sex, and all that kind of stuff. That is going to be more important than a vaccination that you had, which is no more important in most teenagers' head than like tuberculosis vaccination when they were in elementary school.
Exactly. And that's the best part about this is that, and to me this is the best part, is that you should be able to take these scientific studies and where the heck is the, administration's, health advisor, right? Where is anybody that sits in the cabinet that's helping with legislation? Why are we not seeing more of this legislation introduced statewide? Here is an actual study, and this is not the only study. There is actually several other studies, not as in depth as this one, but there's several other studies that are demonstrating that giving vaccinations is not leading to increased sexual behavior. So why is that not just something where we go, okay, hey, everybody, we need to start giving this vaccination out to more people? It just seems simple that it should be passed countrywide and then maybe started to be used overseas. I don't know. I don't understand the logic in the politics when the science study shows us it's not correlation any longer. So stop using it and start passing health initiatives to help people before we all die.
2 quick examples. 1, the Christian Bible is a book of love. 2, one scientific study that said that MMR vaccine causes autism. Cherry picking. This is entirely about cherry picking. This is a conclusion by the scientific community that does not find in favor of the opinions that the evangelicals and that the conservatives in this country want to promote. This doesn't support their narrative. They will not support this information. They will not disseminate it. They will not put it out there. They will ignore it completely until a scientific study comes out that confirms their bias. The same thing with the Bible. The same thing with a lot of these other things. Like only the parts of the Bible that make them feel good stand, and the only science that confirms them will get acknowledged.
That's very true. Well, that's it for Science Time with Chris and Chris, the Chris Square Duel. Oh, I just couldn't help but play the ending of that song again. And that's it's funny it's funny we joke on here about science, but both of us genuinely love science with an extreme passion.
Yeah, so sometimes we love science a little bit inappropriately. It's just, I don't know. Science segments, there's nothing wrong with them. We'll never run out of any, fun with those things. This is a great study that you found, and so I mean, what is bad about learning a little bit about what the scientific community is finding consensus on now? It'll never get old.
But for the last segment tonight, I thought we'd talk about Prop 13 in California. And it's kind of funny,
Dun dun dun.
It seems silly. Why would we talk about California, right? But this is, I don't know, this seems like a pretty important conversation to be having. And I don't think enough people are actually having this conversation.
It's important enough. If anybody listens to NPR, like on their Sirius XM or there's NPR One on there, and then there's NPR Now. There's a bunch of different ones. Either way, the show Forum is California based, and they're always doing this like California based this and California based that and Bay Area based this, and I'm always wondering why the heck that matters so much, and like why am I interested in the California transit system or whatever, because it spreads what California does and what Texas does, and what some of the bigger, more influential states in this country does is they influence the rest of the states throughout the country. That's why this is important. Some of the settings and the things that California does to set up the rest of the country, it influences what the rest of the states do, especially when it comes to fossil fuel stuff. Because California is a special exemption. They're allowed to set their own fossil fuel regulations. Well, the big car manufacturers don't want to create 2 different types of cars, so they make a car that that works in the most restrictive place in the country, and then they disseminate that car throughout. California can kind of do the same kind of thing with Prop 13, which has to deal with people being able to rent out high cost locations and basically turn a small house into a massive income influx for their own personal portfolio and whatever. This is a big thing that if California allows it, then the next thing you know, major metropolitan areas throughout the rest of the country are allowing it, and that's kind of freaky. So I mean, so the Prop 13, did you essentially just want to start right out with just what the heck it is? Because I know you had something that's just like absentee landlords are making a killing off of this, which is kind of by design.
Yeah, and so I guess the first thing I wanted to do was talk about what it was, right? Because I didn't actually understand it, and I didn't know it was a law that had been going on for a long time, right? So this isn't like a new constitutional amendment. This is something that California had passed back in the late 70s. And essentially what was approved by California voters was the case that they came up with was Nordlinger versus Hahn, right? and essentially is the
I love listening to you say names.
Why? That is horrible. You should just take over saying the names.
Well, no, dude. Nordlinger.
That's what it looks like.
Like a slow, a slow description of Nordlinger is a lingering description of Nordlinger. Makes me just happy. It just so Nordlinger, they had their court case. Continue.
Versus Han. So the essentially they talked about taxing real estate. The maximum amount of any tax on real estate property shall not exceed 1% of the full cash value of such property. The 1% tax will be collected by the counties and appropriated according to the law districts. So essentially, the proposition decreased property taxes by assessing property values at their 1976 value and restricted annual increases of assessed value of the real property to an inflation factor not to exceed 2%, more than 2% a year. That's crazy, right? So, and we're talking about one of the largest real estate areas that's growing. Is this
another thing? Well, another thing that's really important, just one more sentence on what you had there, is also it prohibited reassessment of a new base year value except for in cases of a change or ownership or completion of new construction. So if you don't have a change in ownership since 1976, you are effectively paying the 1976 tax value. We're talking pre-inflation. Inflation is not considered in this thing. So like you could be paying, $1,000 a year in taxes for a building or a house that's worth millions and millions of dollars. And so there's a decrease in the taxable income that's coming into the city for this. And so how are they going to do this? They have to increase rates somewhere. They're going to be increasing taxes and rentals and all kinds of other stuff. But this is essentially a huge boost for people who own property and a real massive boost for people who have owned property for a long time.
Yeah, and the originally they claimed the reason they wanted to do this is because people that had retired or were close to retirement who had owned their houses for a long time in California, when the boom started to happen in the 70s, could no longer afford to keep their houses because their taxes were going up to such an extreme extent on the houses. So they wanted to pass something that would help allow these people to keep, their houses and not lose them to,
now,
not being able to pay your
that
taxes.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, so altruistically, that makes sense. So if you said, okay, well, that's what we're going to do, but we're going to put a restriction on it. You can't turn your property into a rental property where you're turning this into a major source of income. This has to be your primary residence where you're going to live. And let's say maybe there's a requirement that to qualify for this, you need to be over 50 years of age or something. I mean, they could have done something. This is what we've talked about multiple times throughout the show when it comes to like tech, is weird side effects. That they unintended consequences of a major decision. This is like, okay, that's cool. People they're looking at a boom in real estate, and we're trying not to gentrify older fixed income people out of our city because they're a great part of our city. And in the long run, what they did was create this rent to own massive money making scam almost is what it looks like nowadays.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because this didn't start out as a proposition to, force a conservative viewpoint onto people. It was actually done out of a very humanistic, thing. We don't want all these older people to have to lose their homes who've lived here forever. And in fairness, it's not fair to them just because inflation is going off the charts in these other areas because of what's happening. But the problem is that the wording that they put in there is allowing for, as long as you don't sell it, for this to continue to happen. So as long as it doesn't change ownership, and again, that's kind of a murky water too, right? But as long as you don't change ownership, you could just continue to pass this house down. And so your house value is going to continue to skyrocket, but nobody's going to pay more in taxes. So if your house was worth $500,000 then, and now it's worth $1.8 million or something like that, your taxes are not going up nominally, even if it's changed hands but not changed households. And that's the problem. Is it was a very nearsighted a very nearsighted thought about what they needed to do to solve the problem. So there's other
what
articles.
probably happened with this? Well, just real quick, what probably happened with this is they probably came down to like a deadline where they're like, we have to get the language figured out. We have to jam it in there and get it done. And they probably didn't think 30 years into the future. So like the tax reform plan that they just recently had with the GOP, and they jammed that thing down there, and they did it in 0 days. Like they did this thing so fast. The last reform 30 years ago took something like 2.5 years to complete and completely figure out. They did this in like 6 months. You know what kind of weird unintended consequences we're going to have from all these massive changes they proposed? Who knows? Who really has any idea? Because we didn't look at it long enough. This is a situation where it probably was something like that. We're like, well, we have a good idea. Let's work this through. But, oh, shit, there's a deadline. We got to hammer it. Bang, 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 bang. And they didn't talk to anyone who had a lot of future sense to plan something out like this. Like, listen, you guys should restrict this so that people don't exploit it and turn it into this weird business loophole. And nobody mentioned it. Nobody thought of that or whatever. And it could be, a lack of hindsight. But these are things that need to be done when it comes to legislators. And this is another area, one of the reasons why I have been finding myself less and less supportive of things like term limits, is because a new senator, a new House representative, a new whatever legislator would go, oh, it's awesome, pass it. But someone who had been there for 20 years would be like, you know what? I've seen people take advantage of stuff like this and crap all over it and take what's a good idea and make it terrible. We should probably be very specific. Like that kind of insight, that lawyerly insight would be really useful here. And it's unfortunate that it's kind of snowballed as bad as it has.
Yeah, and so that's what they're talking about, is how this has harmed the different communities in California and how they want to change this. And it's actually going to be put up to the vote, they believe, here very shortly. So it's going to be something that will happen in, I don't know, the next couple of months. So
it's on the ballot for 2018?
That's what they're working towards, yes. So the latest article that I had read last week is it looks like it's heading to the ballot. That's what they're doing. They've gotten the votes. It still has to be, voted on to, get put on the actual, ballot to be voted on. But they've gathered the signatures that's needed.
So they probably need to finalize the language so that they can get it on the ballot. Michigan's got a bunch of stuff like that right now, where there's a whole bunch of propositions on the Michigan ballots, but they haven't finalized the language, so it's coming down to the wire as to whether or not to get in. So it sounds like California is doing the same thing with this one.
Yes. And, they're claiming that it won't actually increase too many people's taxes, but there's a lot of people that are opposing it. There's people that are saying, hey, we don't want to do this. We don't want this to happen. We don't want reassessments to come in, because they're worried that what's going to happen is, they're going to lose their houses probably. They're looking at $11 billion of additional revenue from taxes by doing these reassessments. And the problem is that it's a loophole, It's just this huge loophole.
Yeah, you're closing a loophole, and so essentially you're taking money that should have been in the government for years and years and years and years and years. Now they're going to be redirecting that money back into the government. So what they could do as part of this proposition is reduce the property tax, reduce the overall real estate tax on these properties, because now those properties are going to be legitimately equalized. There's a market. What they call this is a market. What do they call it? A market correction that is happening here. It's like the tax rates on a ton of these homes are not where they should be, and so the market is incredibly high because of people using this loophole to make huge, ridiculous amounts of money. The market's going to correct itself when they start properly taxing these houses. And so that'll bring the cost of rental down, because people won't be able to just extravagantly load this up. And, this is a market correction. It's painful. It's ugly. People lose their stuff. But hopefully in the near future, there's a net forward progress movement. One of the things that's been happening in the state of New York is taxi medallions used to be worth somewhere over $1 million, and now they're down to like $300,000. So there's a limited number of taxis that you can have in Michigan or in New York, and they used to be crazily overvalued. And there was a market correction called Uber, And that changed the way everything worked. And now the taxi medallions are down in value, but the people who bet their entire life savings on those medallions are, they're losing out. And this is one of the sad side effects of capitalism, when there's going to be some winners and some losers. And so there needs to be something set up in the state that when they do incentivize, or not so much incentivize, but when they do institute this new tax plan in there needs to be, a safety net for not the guy who has 14 properties on Main Street who's renting all those, and now he's going to be losing his ass on those massive mortgages, but for the people who made this a primary residence, and they're going to have a hard time keeping their house now because their mortgage is inflated. Those are the people that need to be saved, not the guy who's using it as a main source of income. So once again, it comes back to the same thing that I mentioned earlier, is that if these people have this listed as their primary source of residence, the place where they live on a regular basis, there should be things set aside to help them deal with this new increase in taxes. But the guys who are renting this stuff out, sorry, bro, this is your income. This is the bet you made. This is an investment on Wall Street that you took, a real estate investment. Sometimes you're gonna have losses. Sometimes there are market losses. You got to deal with it. But the primary residence people, I think they should be given a little bit of help.
Yes, and that's the thing here. Actually, there was an amendment, to this, right? And that was the big thing here. The amendment was Proposition 58, and that's actually one of the larger things that's triggering this is you can inherit real estate, right? And so, in one of the articles, they actually used Jeff Bridges, right? And Bell Bridges, and I don't know how...
What?
Bell? Jeff Bridges. You know who Jeff Bridges is, right?
Yeah, the actor.
Yes, the actor. So anyway, him and his sister actually inherited a Malibu house back in the 50s from their mother, right? And she's owned it since the 50s, I'm sorry. And they inherited it from her, right? There is a posting for a Malibu dream house for $16,000 a month, right? You know how much the property taxes are for the whole year for that house? So they want to rent it out at $16,000 a month. The property taxes for that
5,000.
house are less than half of that month's rent. That's insane. So they're going to make $160,000. Yeah, for the whole year. For the whole year is less than $8,000.
How much did they say what the property was totally worth?
No, they didn't. But I'm guessing probably a couple $1 million is my guess.
Yeah. Okay, so in Kentwood, Michigan, in the building that I work in, that my company owns, we bought it for $335,000. My taxes per year are over $7,500 a year. And then I have a personal property tax of another $5,000 for the year. So I paid $12,000 just in property taxes for a $300 and some change $1,000 building. These people in California have million dollar houses and properties, and they're paying less than what I pay.
Yeah, and there's
some perspective there for you.
Yeah, and there's actually another proposition.
Square foot stick building.
Yeah, your stick building. There's actually even it gets worse, man. There's another proposition called Proposition 5, right, on this year's general election ballot, right? So there's another proposition on this ballot that will allow people that own this house who are over 55 to move to a house of equal or lesser value in the same county one time and keep the same adjusted property taxes. So get this, you could own a multi-million-dollar house, sell it, move to a cheaper house, and still keep your low-end property taxes as basically a grandfather clause. So there is good reason to start repealing Proposition 13 because people continue to tack on, and that's a problem here, folks. We're seeing them continuing to tack on, and the reason, at the beginning you said rich absentee landlords make a killing from Prop 13. Think of it this way: if you owned a house, let's say your grandmother owned a house in California. She dies, gives it to your parents. Your parents die, they give it to you. You live in Michigan, where it's cheap. For what they're charging for some of those houses, $16,000 a month. That's a pretty bloody good income. You could live off the income of that house and not do anything in Michigan.
Yeah. If you do the math on that, essentially you're paying half in. Wait, so you said that their property taxes are $7,000 for the year, not per month?
Yeah.
Yeah, so $7,000 per year with $16,000 a month. You're looking at less than $650 a month in your taxes. So add up all the maintenance fees for taking care of, someone else living in your giant mansion house. Let's say at worst case scenario, they break a whole bunch of stuff every year. So you're at $12,000 to $13,000 a year, or a month of income that you're bringing in. And so just doing quick, it's $120,000 for 10, and another 3 times 12 is 24. So $124,000 a year in general income just because you get to own a house that your family owned before 1976. That's what you get. So once again, who is benefiting from this? You know what I mean? Like the rips absentee landlords or whatever, but the people who are fighting for this, the people who want to keep this, the people who want this kind of thing to exist. This isn't the guy who's working at Costco who's busting his ass every day. This isn't me who's working in a machine shop. I'm going to get a letter saying, hey, your great aunt passed away in California, and now you don't have to work for the rest of your life because you have $100,000 in income every year. These aren't the people that are benefiting from this. Like, this isn't happening. The people that are benefiting from this are the people who we constantly rail about on this show, who are the elites in our society, who can afford these types of things, who can exploit these kinds of loopholes. These are the types of things that this is an equalization in, the market. And nobody who has money, who makes money, and their money makes them money, and they basically can live a life with relatively low stress and just absorb this kind of societal cost. They don't want this to happen. And so they're lobbying and they're using their strength in California to fight this. One of the things that's nice is California is pretty liberal and they have a good way of fighting it. But California, they call 6 figures now is minimum wage or low income in a lot of cities in California. So like, it's just a different world over there. But like the people that are benefiting the most from this, I would argue, are the people who are a little bit higher on the echelon, and the market cap could equalize and bring them down a little bit.
Exactly. And the Los Angeles Times actually had an interesting, take on this, right? They weren't completely for repealing or reforming Prop 13. They were actually talking about trying to standardize housing prices. So it's not like they were going to say, hey, do whatever you want. They're trying to say, hey, stop putting renters in here at exorbitant rates, because the renters aren't the ones doing it. So all these people are making zoning laws. These people that don't, these commercial companies are making zoning laws, and they're allowing suburbs and beach communities to be exempt from these higher taxes, which also limits the value of the supply of the local housing. So if you can build a 100-acre ranch, or you have a 100-acre ranch that you're paying very little in taxes on, you could, say, hey, you don't need that whole thing. Either pay the taxes to own that amount of land and give it back to the community to let us build other things, or, hey, why don't we just stop letting you make zoning laws and all these other things that allow us to go in and develop some of this land to put more housing, to make it cheaper for those that have to rent there. And it's funny, my buddy, I was telling you about a couple weeks ago that I went to, dinner with him, and he lives in California. And he said when him and his wife moved to California, they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment to start with. I mean, that's what they had to do to make ends meet, because it was that bloody expensive for them to live in California.
Some of the things that are happening in California are it's what the rest of the country says is gentrification when they're complaining about it. Like, California is the embodiment of it in a lot of cases. Like, it really is. It's insane. So like what you mentioned there, like having a 100-acre ranch. So like the guy who has the 100-acre ranch, proportionally, if you had 100 acres of apartments, the taxes that the 100-acre ranch guy is going to pay versus the 100 acres of apartments is going to pay, it's going to be lower. And so there's an incentive for, big, giant, rich house people to be in there. But when you talk about like building like low income housing or middle class housing, the tax incentive is there, but the people that can afford it are not interested in that. So like one of the things that we talk about with Michigan and Grand Rapids housing is that it's worth a ton of money, but we're not building, middle class and lower income housing in a lot of these areas right now. Like if you look at the medical mile throughout Grand Rapids, we're building anything that's getting built right now is super expensive stuff. Like so that it's gentrification because the only thing getting built, the only new construction is for people who can afford really high-end stuff, and it's pushing out people in the middle class. The same kind of things are happening throughout California, is that the only thing that can get completed in new construction is going to be really expensive stuff. And that was one of the things that Prop 13 was dealing with, is new construction was something that was getting the full extent of the law. So I'm curious as how they got around that with new construction, because there's tons of that in California. So like what they would do is just keep one wall up so that you're still considered to be modifying the old house, which is something called grandfathering in. It's something that we've done all over the country. And my father did it. He could keep he didn't have to have an architect redraw the house as long as he kept one wall up when we rebuilt our house in Farmington Hills and Grand Rapids, or in Farmington Hills, the Detroit suburbs. So like those kinds of things, like all these little tricks are things people can use. Keep that crazy low tax base, build this giant monstrous house, and whatever. Like all these kinds of things are very specific things that need to be paid attention to. And that Prop 13 in its original form, they never planned probably for it to be this complex. But over time, the tax law needs to change. It needs to be malleable. And this is a great example of a case where it really needs to change. We talk about this all the time for what the GOP tax plan did recently with business and everything. It's like there's a lot of changes that need to happen, but it also needs to change again in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years, or whatever. And hopefully they can make some changes in California.
Yeah, exactly. Because essentially what's happening is they are, you have people with second properties, people that are inheriting homes, people that are using these inheritance as an income, but it's an even bigger income, right, when they don't have to pay the appropriated taxes for the area. And that's the bigger problem. That's the largest problem that they're having, is that all these people are inheriting houses, renting them, and the rent that they charge, the property taxes for the whole year is like half to 3/4 of that month's rent. It's insane. And so people are using these as, revenues, as secondary, revenues. And like you were saying earlier, screw it. At this current time, let those people who made investments or who think these are investments, let them suffer at the hands of the economy a little bit. Let's change the way people are seeing things and try and equalize it for those that are struggling, who don't have a multi-million-dollar house that they inherited for free.
Or even the people... Well, even some of the people that have good money, but this is their residence. Like, this isn't a place where they're trying to, like, make money on. This is where they live. You can increase their taxes or whatever, but, like, increase the taxes on the guys who are trying to, like, just buy a whole bunch of houses all over a city and make millions of dollars. Screw those guys.
Yeah, and I would say, I would probably go a step farther than you and say, hey, if you don't physically live in that house, and and my thing would be, if that's not your only house of residence, like if that's your only house of residence, then fine, maybe let's uphold this for you. But if you're living there and you own a second house somewhere else, your taxes should go up there. If you own that house and are renting it out, your taxes should go up there. That's just the way I see it. Like, let's make it cheaper for the people that want to live in California and not up here. It'd be like if somebody walked into Grand Rapids before the housing boom and bought 50 of those houses, renovated them, and now we're charging them an extreme amount of money, to rent there. And, oh, hey, by the way, you only have to pay 1/10 of what the taxes are for that house worth because, you bought them during the recession. We gave you a tax credit. That's ridiculous. I get it. It's an investment, but I think sometimes these investments extend a little too far. That's it for us here at Cellar Door Skeptics tonight. Thank you all for joining us on another adventure. Stay tuned, because next week we'll be coming back on the holiday with a very special episode for you all. Thank you all, and have an amazing evening.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com.